All right. Hi, everybody. Um, Today we are going to continue our notes on World War One. And I apologize, first of all. I mean, I can't really necessarily apologize for a global pandemic, but I can apologize for the fact that we got cut halfway through our blame game project, which is so disappointing. Still trying to figure out a plan for how we are going to listen to the other three presentations. At this point so far, I am so not creative that I just really think we'll present the day we come back, whenever that is. I mean, currently, right now, it's April 6th. But who knows what could happen between then and now. However, what we can do is we can continue with our World War One notes, and so that is what we are going to do. Remember that in this next 2 week period, you will have a test, and we'll be doing that through AP Classroom. So, reminder to keep checking with AP Classroom, see if your login works. If not, contact College Board, contact me so I can help you in whatever way I can and trying to figure out how to get that to work. But for now, we're just going to have to do with the best that we can with what we have. And so we're going to take notes. What I would like to count this towards your participation points for today. The notes that you do take at the end of this presentation, you will just take a picture of them, upload them to this assignment so that I can give you your points, and those will be due by the end of the day. So without further ado, we will continue with World War One. And so we kind of already talked about how the Great War began. As we talked about, 1914, Archduke Franz Ferdinand assassinated in an Austrian province by Serbian terrorists. That province being Bosnia, which had been annexed by the Austro-Hungarian Empire. The Serbian terrorists were not necessarily connected to the government, not supported or condoned by the Serbian government. However, when we look to blame and who should we be pointing fingers at, we look often at the fact that the group was rooted in Serbia. But Princip, the one who actually fires the gun, kills Ferdinand, kills his wife Sophie, was Bosnian. So there's a lot of gray area there, as you've all found out in your research for our Blame Game project. But that background, as we've talked about, Serbia was also in an alliance with Russia. They had fought several wars against the Ottoman Empire and Austro-Hungarian Empire as a neighbor. And so there was just a lot of tension. And we talked about like some of those core reasons why we get into war, right? Our acronym MAIN: militarism, alliances, imperialism, and I'm waiting for it. I'm waiting for it. What is the N? No, no one. All right, nationalism, which we have talked about for so long. But Austria gives Serbia basically an ultimatum just to rejoin the Austrian Empire. But Austria will declare war on July 28th after a lot of encouragement from Germany, which we can see in page 829 of your textbooks. But July 29th, Russia declares war on Austria and Germany. So literally just one day later, Russia responding to its alliance. And August 3rd, just a few days even later, Germany will then invade Belgium using the Schlieffen Plan as justification. And the significant consequences of Germany using this plan, good to think about, because of this fact that Germany now will be setting a precedent or an example from World War One, which will carry over into World War Two, of this idea of Germany getting into trouble because they just feel the need that they can invade in other countries. And so then, because of that, day after Belgium's, who was neutral, but Belgium being invaded in, Britain will declare war on Germany. And so a lot of your major players within what? 28th, 29th, 30th, 31st, 1st, 2nd of August, 3rd, 4th, literally only within 8 days, so a little over a week, we have a lot of our major players fighting in World War One. And so in that, to be able to mobilize for war, the citizens were honestly excited. And it wasn't even this idea that we're going to be in this war for 5 years and we're going to fight forever. It was really this idea of we're starting this war end of July, early August. I think we can be at home in time for Christmas. Like, we're going to get this done. But some governments, they're going to intervene with the economy. They'll create new government agencies, oftentimes as a response to wanting to help the government, help with control, helping the people during a time of war. But they'll also censor their citizens using propaganda. So you'll see specifically in this poster, and we'll reference this one because it's in English. But victory is a question of stamina. Send the wheat, meat, fats, sugar, the fuel for fighters. And that's going to be created by the United States Food Administration. And to be clear, America at this point in time, 1914, is not involved in the war. But once they do, we will create the United States Food Administration, which will be sending out propaganda, these posters, to try and elicit some sort of emotion in you to want to get you to help. And so we're using propaganda, we're trying to kind of sway the emotions of the people, no matter what country we are from, to help support the government in this idea of going to war, or even you'll see anti-war propaganda where people in these posters are being like, well, this war is awful, don't support it, do whatever you can to be vocal against it. Or you could even see the possibility of any correspondence that you send back and forth will be monitored by the government. Like, certain pieces are going to be redacted from people's mail just simply because they were worried that we were using code in any sort of letters that could help the enemy side. And so we get really, really paranoid. But it is this idea that cultures are fighting cultures, governments are fighting governments, and we don't know who we can trust. We're also going to draft our soldiers. This is not really anything new for most countries. This idea of selecting people who are going to have to serve and playing it, even maybe using some propaganda in there of this idea that it is your duty, it is your honor, it is your responsibility. But because a lot of these men are being drafted, their jobs are now open. And so we'll also see women being utilized a lot in the workplace. But unfortunately, after the war, when the men come home, they will push women back to more of your home sphere and not the labor force. But some governments will also be able to create military dictatorships. A good example of this is going to be Germany under their leader Hindenburg, and also show that people, when they are living in a time of fear of war, are going to oftentimes look to one person. And so when we talk a lot about like American wars, we oftentimes think of like, oh, well, Abraham Lincoln, the Civil War, we give him extra powers. When we get to World War II, looking at Franklin D. Roosevelt, the extra measures he takes to be able to help America, but in doing so becomes the one person America looks to. And they don't become dictatorships, but they are a good example of when we are in fear of war, we oftentimes give our focus and give a lot of power up to one key person to be able to utilize that power to make us feel safer. To wage total warfare, this idea that we are going to just completely demolish the people around us, the people we are fighting, even the landscape around us, as you can see in this top picture as well. The ways that we're going to do that, and the reason why World War I will be so pivotal in total warfare, is this idea of modern machinery. And so total warfare, it affects both soldiers in long deadly battles, civilians as well, and this idea of weapons productions, but also destroying towns, destroying villages. If any of you have seen the movie 1917, although that is not my obviously favorite movie, but the movie 1917 plays a lot into, there's a scene where he is walking through more of a deserted, burnt down town or village, and it shows that effect of total war. But we're also seeing trench warfare, which is going to have a lot of heavy casualties with little gain. Really, just the fact that we're digging trenches and we're waiting for someone to come out over the trench in some form of attack, whether it's one person, whether it's a whole regiment. And this idea that now that they're out in the open, we can totally shoot them and kill them. And so the area in between enemy trenches would also be called no man's land. It would be filled with a lot of barbed wire, maybe mines to try and keep people from running over to the other side. But these new weapons, technology, they're going to cause mass casualties. And so by even just 1915, and we know Russia doesn't last very long in World War I, but Russia has 2.5 million dead, wounded, or captured. And the idea of the number who is dead, wounded, or captured, that is a casualty. So when you're talking about casualties of war, know that we're not just talking about people who have died, but we're also talking about people who have been taken as prisoners of war, but also those who are wounded in hospitals. But a third of your civilians will be killed, or they will flee under the German occupation in Eastern Europe. So this is not just a war where we are only hurting the soldiers who are fighting for countries. Like, there are people who are not involved, who maybe don't even have any sort of opinion, just living their lives in these towns, in these villages, who are getting caught in the crossfire. But even once America, oh, I apologize, not America. I saw that really, really quickly. 1 million Armenians, and so that is a smaller country in Eastern Europe. They are killed by Ottomans before even Russia gets to that area and liberates it. And so a good question to come across, and granted, you do not have to answer this for any sort of slide homework right now, but be able to, as we're getting ready for this AP test, compare the similarities and differences between warfare tactics used by generals during the Great War with tactics used in like the 1700s when we're fighting the Revolutionary War, when we're going to get into like the French Revolution. How will this make the Great War the deadliest war up until this time? And we've talked a lot about how we have strategy with like total war, but additionally, those new weapons, that technology, the fact that we're going to have mustard gas, the fact that we're having tanks, the fact that we're going to be using airplanes, and so that will up the numbers. But then also think about, this is a global war. Everyone is fighting everyone in the quote unquote known world, and or at least the world, parts of the world that people in history actually would give voice to at this point in time. And so that will make it additionally a factor that it will be more deadly than maybe what we would see in the 1700s. But the widening of the war will also be something that we'll need to keep in consideration. And granted, we're kind of flying pretty quickly through these slides that I want to go over today, partially because you're not talking to me, and so we can't go into extra depth on anything because you're not asking questions, but also you have a lot of other things that you're going to be doing over e-learning. But for those of you, specifically my 4 juniors in this class, you will already have some of this content knowledge already in your brains, but the idea that the United States will eventually come into the war as we are continuing to expand this global presence of World War I, Italy will join your Triple Entente with the promise of gaining Austrian territory. On a map of Europe, Austria is directly north of Italy, along with Switzerland, but Austrian territory will be promised to Italy if they join the war efforts. The Ottomans will end up joining, and remember, the Ottomans are also crumbling. Sorry about you, Ottoman Empire, but they will join your Central Powers, which brings the war into the Middle East. So by involving more and more countries, we are spreading out this war geographically. And so we're going to be fighting in the Middle East. With the Arabians' help, Britain will conquer southern Iraq, Syria. Japan will also come into the mix. Remember, we forcibly make Japan open their doors with Commodore Perry. And we seize the German colonies in China. And so this map over here shows a pretty good color coding of who has what influence in Asia. There's not really much outside of the Japanese who have actual like Asian influence, like quote unquote home influence. You see these impacts of our last unit when we talked about imperialism, how that has really still impacted Asia in World War I. And so African and Asian nationals, they will help France, but Britain will also kick out Germany from this whole Asian sphere as well, but also in Africa. But then 2 really big things are going to happen for the United States to join the war. You're going to see a British passenger liner called the Lusitania be sunk by German U-boats, which are just a fancy word for submarines, and there were going to be American citizens on the ship, and so that will be the big hitter. It'll be this idea American passengers were on this boat, and they have died, and oh my goodness, now we have some sort of threat. And we can see oftentimes in the history of the United States when American citizens are targeted, and not necessarily or they intentionally targeted in this sinking of the Lusitania, but when we see our citizens hurt or injured, America typically ups its game, specifically almost to the point of calling for war. But the Lusitania also had weapons on the boat, which was going to be a big moneymaker for the United States in World War I before we even joined. We were selling a lot of weapons to both sides, but really mainly to the Triple Entente. But we'll also see the Zimmermann letter being sent between Germany and Mexico, where Germany says, Mexico, if you help us out, we're going to come and help you when we win this war, invade southwestern United States and take back Texas and New Mexico and Arizona. The United States doesn't even intercept this letter. It's actually the British. And so the British use this to their advantage and show it to the United States saying, oh my goodness, look what Germany is doing to Mexico. They're going to come and get you. Maybe you should come help us out fight this war. And so the United States takes the Zimmermann letter as an actual threat of, oh my goodness, maybe Germany will try to reach out to Mexico, even though this letter was intercepted. We feel this as a threat to our actual mainland United States, and so we will enter into the war. And so Woodrow Wilson, who was the president at the time, will bring the United States into the actual conflict. And so this idea of this total war, as we're expanding geographically, as we're expanding influentially, as we're expanding in political types that are coming and helping in this war, there's a lot of impact both on society, both on in politics. But for society, it's exposing soldiers to foreign cultures, whether that is to location, whether you are fighting in North Africa, whether you're fighting on the Western Front in France, whether you're fighting on the Eastern Front. This interaction with other countries will be a really big deal. But remember, we're also changing women's roles and views on gender roles with women working in the workplace. And also we're creating more social equity by that. Because women are working in the workplace, they're going to be seen more as equals to men because they can handle these jobs. And when you're working in industry in a time of war, your production is 2 to 3 times more than during just your regular peacetime. But in politics, the impact that we're going to see as well will be food shortages that are going to lead to strikes and protests and military response on the government side for these strikes. And as we've seen in European history over time, we do not respond kindly to any sort of strike or protest against the government, specifically in a time of war. It is deemed very disrespectful, even almost war crime-esque, for people to be protesting during a time of war. You'll see France's Clemenceau become the virtual dictator. I probably also really butchered that name. I apologize. But you're going to see military dictatorships not only on behalf of Germany, who we oftentimes equate as a bad guy in most parts of world history at this time period, but you'll see France kind of stepping up as well on the side that we don't typically deem as the bad guy, but dictator is still a pretty serious term to be throwing around. The Irish are going to be the Irish revolting, take advantage of the Britain's war problems. And remember, in our last unit, we talked a lot about this idea of Ireland's home rule still being kind of under the British sphere of influence, but wanting to be in charge of their own problems, their own government. And so seeing how Britain is involved in this global war, Ireland will take their time as Britain is a little distracted to be able to cause more problems. But the French, Russian soldiers, they all desert. They refuse to fight. And Russia, as we already know, eventually just even leaves the war completely to figure out their own problems, which is in the next part of this chapter after World War I when we'll talk about the Russian Revolution. But the Central Powers, which are more of your quote unquote bad guys, as we've talked about, they will suffer from the most revolts and internal division, which will also be one of the reasons why World War I will end, due to a lot of your Central Power countries being internally divided and not being able to rally together to fight back in this war effort. And so that is all I have for you today. Remember, take a picture of your notes, upload it onto this assignment on Teams. That way I can count your points for today. And I look forward to seeing you at some point in the future. I almost said near future, but we already know that we're going to not see each other for three weeks. But I'm praying for you, and I'm hoping that this e-learning will be a time where you get to relax, but also to be really, really productive. And if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to ask. All right. Thank you so much. I will talk to you tomorrow.